Let's get more on this now. Joining us live from Durham, the UK, Professor Thom Brooks, Dean and Professor of Law and Government, Durham Law School. Thank you so much for your time. Your thoughts on the fiasco that has been this week in Parliament?
Fiasco it has been. You have a Prime Minister that has largely kept a Brexit plan all to herself, not revealing it to her own cabinet until a few months ago, and then saw one senior member of her cabinet after another not like it. And now, with really only 2 months left, it's only right now, after 2 years of negotiations, after an awful lot of back and forth between her office and Brussels, only today does she offer to talk to leaders of the opposing parties. It's really, and in the national interest. I mean, I think what we're really seeing right now is someone who's motivated mostly by self-interest and self-preservation. The fear of many in the government right now and its backbenchers is if there is a general election, they fear they will lose it. They are worried about another referendum in case it would look like right now that the tide has turned against Brexit, that they might lose that too. And so very wary about going to the polls at the moment. And this is kind of a last gasp of a government that's really on its last legs.
In hindsight, though, given the path that the UK has been on ever since this vote 2.5 years ago delivered what was a pretty tight, you'd have to say, vote for a Brexit in the first place, it was always going to be a shambles the way that it played out. Do you think that David Cameron bears any responsibility here?
Well, I think David Cameron bears enormous responsibility, not least because for the Leave side, those who are arguing for that case, there was never a manifesto or a plan. The people who were peddling it were found later to be in violation of electoral laws and, of course, had no responsibility. None were in government and so on. So I think that there's a lot of question marks about how that ran. And here we are. But all those things said, I think what would have been much better, and I don't think this is necessarily hindsight either speaking, is if only Theresa May had at the very beginning asked other party leaders to come together in a kind of grand coalition in the national interest to work together. She could have, then the plan might not have all been hers. She might not be able to take all the credit, but she would have then had their support. And if they had declined to take part of this and then not liked what followed, she would then be very easy at dismissing them for saying, look, you're naysayers, you're never for it in the first place. But right now, really all the responsibility is hers. She's really taken on this full mantle, hoping, I guess, for the full glory. And really, while David Cameron has a lot of responsibility for effectively letting this genie out of the bottle, I think the way that Theresa May has run this from the beginning has really been shambolic, to say the least. And I think a lot of the responsibility for where we are now must be on her shoulders.
It is interesting, the point that you make about Theresa May. She's in power, but it seems out of power. What does the UK need to get through this now? Leadership or compromise? Because, as we say, given the fact that she seems to be a puppet of a very divided cabinet, her own cabinet seems to be holding the strings on every move that she makes here, the other sides will know this. Labor will know this. Jeremy Corbyn playing it very carefully, very similar to how our opposition leader here in Australia handles things, Bill Shorten, knowing that, well, popularity is not on the side of the government and it's just a waiting game. So what is the plan forward? Leadership, where Theresa May stands up and says this has to happen, or a compromise where we could see perhaps a 6-month delay in Brexit?
Well, I think that her approach has been, as Home Secretary before she was Prime Minister and now as Prime Minister, has really been to be inflexible. She's been overly reliant on a very small group of advisors before that got her into trouble. Previously, she's doing this now, and she's shown she's very bad at listening to the other side and accommodating the other side. She will call it leadership. She will kind of try to march on, at least in the immediate future. But I think that that's going to give way pretty quickly because, as noted, she's really lost control of this Brexit process. I think that the only way forward will be a compromise. Her government is a minority government, and the only vote they've won in the last week has been this vote of no confidence. But they've lost votes around the budget. They've lost votes around this big Brexit bill. Normally, either of those would have taken down a government. So she's really weaker than ever. The kind of compromise I think we'll see will not necessarily be a tweaking of the deal, because we've heard from Brussels that they are not interested in renegotiating, especially with a government that isn't a new government, that doesn't have a new mandate. So I think the compromise will be effectively around a referendum, which I think could actually be her lifeline if she was able to get the public to back it and back her plan.
Professor Thom Brooks, appreciate your insights as always. Thank you.
A pleasure.
The Prime Minister is set to land in Fiji.